Hey everyone, my name is Dennis Furia, and I am the creator of Deck of Wonders. And I am so excited to be talking to you as a part of Virtual Tabletop Gaming Live about the idea that if you are a gamer, you are a game designer. And that's certainly a topic near and dear to my heart. A little bit off the top about Deck of Wonders, my game. It is a solo legacy card game where fate herself has stacked the deck against you. And we'll get into all kinds of details about the idea for the game and the execution of the game and all that. But for now, you can know that we just wrapped up our run on Kickstarter. We raised over $57,000 in support of the game. If you were in that community, thank you so much for your support. And if you missed it, don't worry. By the time you're watching this, we likely have our post campaign running. So either go to the Kickstarter page or go to deckofwondersgame.com, and you'll be able to find ways to get in on Deck of Wonders, even if we're past the official Kickstarter. With all that in mind, it's a bit weird for me to be speaking on the game design side of things, because I certainly think of myself as more of a gamer than a game designer. And I think so much about me coming from the perspective of a gamer and truly being a gamer at heart, as so many people in the industry are. So much about that has informed and made my design work better. And I want to jump into why I think that is. And I also want to encourage anyone out there who's a gamer who might be interested in game design that you absolutely are on the right track, and your passion for gaming, even just as an enthusiast, is more than laying the groundwork for you to be an amazing game designer. Let's start with my history with games. Man, gaming, board gaming and video gaming has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. In fact, I remember back to being a kid. I've got a bunch of brothers and sisters, and we would all play games like Stratego or Monopoly or chess, a lot of the classics together as children in our house. And so gaming has been a part of my life as long as I can remember. And that very quickly transitioned into a love of video games as well. We first got a Game Boy and then a PlayStation. It's just been, on since then. But I can always remember playing games against my brothers and sisters and having fun that way. And I think such a huge part of being successful, if you want to be on the game design, stems from truly having a passion for gaming. I don't think there are that many people who are coming to board games to make a quick buck. If you are, I have bad news for you. It doesn't really work that way. But I have seen time and time again that those who are successful are those who truly have a love of games. And so if that's you, if you have a love of gaming, if that's ingrained in your past like it is into mine, that is going to serve you in all sorts of ways, because I pull from the memories of playing chess or playing Stratego, and all of that history kind of is shoulders that you're standing on as you go to design a game. The other thing I remember is as I reached adulthood, I think I was primarily a video gamer for a while, but as I reached adulthood, board games kind of really came back on my radar. And certainly in the last 5 to 10 years, board games have had a renaissance. And I was not exempt from that. And so kind of rediscovered games and certainly discovered modern gaming. And that was a regular part of our family time together. Me and my wife will play a lot of 2-player games for date nights. Now that my kids are getting older, that becomes part of our activities, playing kid-friendly games together. And just all that time experiencing lots of different games is so informative for the way that you think about game design. And so as someone who's trying to create, as someone who's trying to come up with ideas, you never do that in a vacuum. Your ideas are always going to come from connections between different things that you've experienced. And so making sure that you have as broad a possible set of experienced things to draw from will make your ideas that much better. And so in that way, being a gamer makes you a better game designer, purely because you're going to be experiencing the interesting ideas that are out there, the different mechanics that are out there, and kind of playing those, enjoying those, having those as references, even if it's subconsciously, will make you a better game designer. And that kind of leads a little bit into the story of how I came up with Deck of Wonders. I have too many gaming groups going on, lots of amazing people to play with. And as I mentioned, I'm also a parent, and an adult, surprise, right? And anyone who's kind of in that phase of life knows how busy and chaotic things can be. And that, you don't have to have kids for that to be the case, but kids certainly ensure that things are going to be crazy. And at the same time, loving playing games, having groups that you want to play with, and loving specifically more complex strategic games was a big part of who I was. But it can be difficult when you're an adult, when you have kids, to coordinate schedules for games, or to find the time to get all the friends together, even like physical space for some of these games, the heavier games. Is tough to kind of set aside. And so getting these friend groups together to play complex strategic games felt kind of like a Herculean effort, and took a lot. And we were playing through Gloomhaven at the time. And we'd spend 3 months, it felt like, trying to get a session together, and then 3 hours setting up, play for a half hour, and then 3 hours tearing down. And we loved Gloomhaven. It's such an amazing game. And we had these conversations about how awesome it was as a game. Just the incredible time we were having playing it. And anyone who's played that game knows, to my point of inspiration coming from other places, other games that you play, knows that it's very friendly to being soloable. And it is, it's primarily a co-op game, but you can very easily play it solo just by manning multiple characters. And we got into a discussion about like how cool is that? How powerful is that you might be able to have a game that is as deep as Gloomhaven, have a game that is as complex and rich and campaign-driven as Gloomhaven, but have it as an experience that you can do on your own. Even though that's not what we were doing, as we were experiencing the pain of trying to get everyone together for this gaming session, we're like, man, if you could do this without having to worry about coordinating friends, and be able to kind of just do it at the drop of a hat whenever you had time, how cool would that be? And at the same time, we're discussing, how interesting some of the mechanics going on were, and how those might be impacted by playing solo instead of with a group, or what additional things you could do if you were playing solo or versus with a group. And I think that's something that you, as a gamer, might not recognize as game design. If you've ever sat around with friends and talk about what made the gaming session that you just experienced cool, or what was frustrating and could have been better, kind of debriefing your gaming session, you're doing game design. Surprise, if you've ever gotten to the end of a game and been like, well, let's turn over the next couple of cards and just see what would have happened. There's, the queen was buried. That's why. Or, if you've ever kind of debriefed a game that way, that's game design. That is the same type of thinking and critical eye that goes into designing your own game. And these discussions with friends were all also very much in the game design vein. We weren't specifically trying to create a new game, but we were kind of thinking about the systems behind the games we were enjoying with a critical eye. I would also say, if you have ever, as a gamer, if you've ever made a house rule because you thought it was more interesting, you are so much closer to game design than you think you are. Sitting around talking with friends, all that stuff that I just mentioned, that is all kind of stealth game design that you're probably already doing without realizing it, if you don't already think of yourself as a game designer. And so just those aspects, playing with friends and enjoying these complicated games, started to lead me towards the idea of Deck of Wonders. And what would it be like if you had a game that was as complex as Gloomhaven, had the legacy campaign element, etc., but at the same time was made primarily for solo play and was made to be enjoyed in 15-minute chunks. So this was pulling from kind of my personal experience of, it can be hard to set aside an entire night, but maybe I could sneak in a game over nap time. And if this game that was taking place on a grander campaign level scale was all in 15-minute bite-sized pieces, that made it so much more accessible to someone like me. And that's absolutely advice I'd give anyone who's a gamer who wants to start bridging into game design, is to work on something or create something that you personally get excited about. Don't worry about if it's mainstream viable, or don't worry about if it's going to be the next mega hit. Make something that you are going to be excited to have out there in the world, and everything else will follow. At the same time, and there's the caveat, right? At the same time, do the extra step of articulating why it's for you. I think it's very easy for us to know what we like and to say, oh, this would be for me, or this is something I think is cool. But do that extra step of generalization to help you understand how to communicate to others why it might be for them. So, the idea for Deck of Wonders was very much for me. But if I extrapolate, it was for me because I am a parent who needs to play games in a shorter period of time. I'm in a situation where it's just easier for me to play on a whim without planning, or without coordinating with a group. And it is for me because I really enjoy more complex strategic games, and as well, more difficult games. And we can get into how I've balanced Deck of Wonders difficulty kind of to my tastes as well. But that is always done with that extra step of extrapolation of, okay, this is for me, and here is the slightly more generalized terminology that I would use to say why it might be for someone else. So if you're into games, if you know you like certain styles of games or feels or mechanics or all that stuff, just do that one extra step of generalizing it slightly, and that takes you right into game design. So I had the idea, in addition to all the things I talked about with Gloomhaven and complex games, I also loved trading card games or collectible card games like Hearthstone, like Magic the Gathering. And literally woke up with the idea in my head one day of a card game like that, where one half of the card was the player half and the other half was a villain's half, or was the bad guy's half. And that it would be one spell or one minion, but they would kind of reflect on each other in interesting ways. And all of them would go into a single deck that both sides were playing from. And that kind of mechanical leap or idea, born out of all the discussions and thinking that I described earlier in the talk, that kind of set me on the path for Deck of Wonders as you might recognize it right now. So when you've got your idea, what do you do next, and what helps you bridge the gap from a gamer saying like, oh, that sounds like it would be fun to play, or this feels like something that would be for me, into a game designer that is actually starting to make it. And I think where I would take you on that one, or where I would guide people who have that idea and want to know what to do next, is to just make it playable as fast as possible. And that means using the components you have around. So my first version of Deck of Wonders was literally with a deck of playing cards that I took with us on a family vacation. If I think back to my days as a kid, right, we would create little alternate games using the pieces from Stratego or whatever else we were playing. And that kind of version of prototyping is totally valid. And totally worth doing. In fact, I would say trying to skip ahead to customized pieces or custom printed this or that is getting a little bit out over your skis too fast. And so the other reason I think that as a gamer, you're closer than you think to game design is that just first step, using whatever's around you to prototype out an idea and to try an idea, is the right first step. It's not only a viable first step, but I think it is the best and the right first step. You don't need a ton of special equipment. You don't need, a ton of extra stuff. Just use what's around you to prototype, because I sincerely believe the most valuable thing you can do for taking an idea for a game out of its early stages is to play it. And so getting it into just some kind of playable format, even if it's with completely placeholder pieces stolen from other games, is the right first step. And hey, if you're a gamer, if you're already enjoying games, you're going to have more of those tools around you. Another reason that if you're a gamer, you are that much closer to game design. That is not to diminish the importance of the art for a game or the pieces for a game. And certainly the art for Deck of Wonders has been a huge point that the community has rallied around. But that becomes more important later on once the bones of the game are in place. So don't ever let the fact that you don't have those things stop you from taking that first step and jumping in with a playable prototype. I think as I did that with Deck of Wonders, like I said, I took a deck of playing cards on a family vacation and wrote up a reference sheet for, the Ace of Spades equals this, and the Two of Diamonds equals that. And I had written that up. I was also working within constraints. There for the longest time were 52 cards in a deck for Deck of Wonders because there were 52 cards in a deck of playing cards. And I think originally that bothered me, or it felt like I should have some grander reason for that number of cards. But I think the truth is, as you start to jump in with whatever's around you, it's okay for those constraints to shape you. Because the big myth that I want to dispel, at least for myself in this talk, is that a game designer has this fully formed idea of what the game should be or how it should play before they actually get in there and start trying it. And I felt certainly that I should have an opinion on the right number of cards in the deck because, I don't know, I had a formula for it, or I had some kind of grand scheme that would dictate to me the right number of cards. In reality, the thing that I needed to do was just to get in there and play. So I had an initial idea for a set of cards, and then I started playing with it. And of course, it was busted. It was broken. There were things that were completely wrong with it. But I don't think I ever would have been able to articulate those things or start polishing and fixing those things if I hadn't have jumped in and started playing. There are things that you will see literally by playing your game, even when you know it's broken and busted or isn't going to work the way you want. There are things you will see by playing your game that you will never be able to see by sitting back and thinking about your game. And don't get me wrong, the thinking about it and processing and imagining is such an amazing, valuable part of game design. But I think our tendency, especially with ideas that we want so badly to work well or want so badly to be perfect, we tend to do way too much of that thinking and imagining before we just put it on the table, make a prototype, and start playing. And of course, going back to the thesis of if you're a gamer, you're a game designer, if you have this giant vocabulary of playing lots of different games, you're going to be able to, by playing your own game, see that much more, make that many more connections as you start encountering the rough edges or maybe brick walls in your design. You'll have more reference points to pull from in how to get around those. And so I think being a gamer as you get into playtesting means that you are a much better game designer on top of things. So that stigma or that myth that might be in your heads, I know it was in mine, of I need to have a more fully formed idea of exactly what this game is going to be or how it's going to work, should never keep you from jumping in and just trying something, even if it's a single scenario in a much broader RPG idea, or even if it's a single turn in something that you want to build a system around. Playing it as early as possible with whatever pieces you can find as a gamer is going to make you that much better of a game designer. And you kind of heard me say within that, try things that you know are going to be broken, not just things that you think might be broken. Try the things that you know are going to be broken. In my experience, as often as not, the pieces that I did feel like I had a clear handle on before playing them were overwritten by playtesting as often as not. And approaching it as a gamer and actually trying it often showed how little I knew on the game design front, but armed me with so much better information and ideas for how to then progress the game on the game design front. If you have an idea, don't worry about it being polished enough. Don't worry about having everything thought through on it all the way. The best way to get yourself there or get yourself closer to there is to make it playable as early as possible with whatever you have lying around, and then just enjoy it as a gamer and see what comes out of those playtests to make the game better. So I spent a vacation doing that. with Deck of Wonders using a deck of playing cards. And I had something that I knew I was excited for, and I felt like deserved me giving it a shot. And so I decided to try taking Deck of Wonders to Gen Con. I had been planning on being at Gen Con anyway, again, gamer. And I just kind of felt like if I've got this idea, and I feel like it's something special, how could I be at Gen Con and not try to demo the game in some way? So that's what I did. I did not have any art to show people. I had a reference list and a stack of playing cards. And we were about 2 weeks away from Gen Con. I didn't have a table reserved. I didn't even officially have a badge for Gen Con. And I almost made a game out of the seeming barriers in front of me. You know, how can I take this random idea that's totally not ready for prime time and be ready for Gen Con to show it off in some meaningful way at Gen Con? And I'd encourage you to do the same. Always ask yourself versus like, what would be the perfect form of this? What would have everything that I want it to have? Ask yourself, what is the bare minimum that would need to be true for me to move forward with this idea? And I think what you'll find is you need so much less than you think to move forward with an idea. So for me, that looked like building out cards in PowerPoint, and these were ugly cards. They had no art on them. They were boxes and circles that I had printed literally the day before I left for Gen Con at a business card printer, that I found randomly, who happened to have one of their people was into games. And that is what I went to Gen Con with. So, you know, I had an idea of what I wanted to show or the feedback I wanted to get. I created just a slice of the full game. So the full game I never would have been able to have ready in time, but I was bringing a single deck for a single character in the game. And so by asking myself, not, you know, what is everything I want to show, but what is the bare minimum I could show, I was able to make creating Deck of Wonders for Gen Con manageable and doable. I think the other thing is to not let yourself turn unknowns into obstacles. There was so much that I didn't know or I didn't have finished. And I think our human instinct is to take unknowns and assume that they are going to be impassable until we figure them out. But I would encourage anyone designing a game or thinking about prototyping to, you know, get clear on your unknowns, capture the things that you don't know, but approach it from the assumption of like, if we can figure this out, what next? So simply because I didn't know what I was doing for art yet, or I didn't know what the full game looked like, et cetera, those are all things that kind of our base reaction human-wise is to say, oh, well, you can't move forward until you know those things. But get comfortable with unknowns and kind of play around the unknowns, if you will. Which again, kind of making it a game. How can I move this forward with the littlest possible? How can I play around the unknowns and kind of game it that way? If you're a gamer, if you're thinking about things that way anyway, it makes it that much easier to do as a game designer. So I set off to Gen Con with my no art prototypes and without any kind of booth or presence at Gen Con. So in the same vein as everything I just described, I actually looked up the Starbucks across the street from Gen Con. And called them and just said, hey, I want to come out. I would love to be posted up at one of your tables with a small demo. Is that okay? And they said yes. And so I went from 2 weeks before not even thinking about going to Gen Con to now having what turned into the best seat in the house for Gen Con for Deck of Wonders. The Starbucks line, I forget if it's a Marriott, I think, some other hotel. Those who have been will be able to fill in that blank. But you know, everyone goes and gets coffee there on their way into Gen Con, which means the wait for your drink is like 20 minutes long. The line is out the door. And people don't have anything to do except for talk to some crazy guy who's demoing a game that doesn't have any art. And so just by thinking about, okay, you know, I don't have a booth at Gen Con. I don't even have an official studio or a presence there. But what really needs to be true for me to show off this game? I just need to be around the people who are at Gen Con because they're excited about games. And that led me to posting up in Starbucks and having a constant stream of people who were giving me their undivided attention because they didn't have anything else to do. They weren't leaving that spot until they had their coffee. So whereas maybe even on the floor of Gen Con, there's always the allure of the next thing or the event you're trying to get to, this was the perfect opportunity to demo Deck of Wonders. So yeah, ask what needs to be true, and don't be afraid of unknowns as you're starting to create your game. The next thing that I did for Gen Con that I'd recommend to anyone designing a game is to capture your expectations up front. So I knew I was demoing a small portion of the game. I kind of had laid out, I'm going to give a high-level description and ask if that sounds interesting, and ask if they would give their email to find out more, and then ask if they would want to play the demo. And then I had enough copies that I was actually selling this prototype of the game for $10 a pop. And I had a guesstimate for what percentage of people I talked to on each of those that would say yes, or that would give me their email, or that would play the game, or etc. And it's so important as a game designer to capture those assumptions up front. The reason being that our minds naturally adjust our expectations to what happened. Neurologically, whatever you thought was going to happen before it happens, once you experience something, once you get a result back, your mind resets what you think your expectations were to say, yeah, that's about what I expected. We naturally like being right? And so we almost need that written reminder. We need those expectations captured in advance to be able to see clearly where things differed from our expectations. Otherwise, the only time that you get that is where you were, completely radically different. So I captured an estimated percentage for each of those metrics going in. I first had the metrics, and then I captured a percentage for them. And I tracked them just with hash marks as I was talking to people. And having that clarity allowed me to then evolve the way I was talking about games and see concretely at the end of my time, oh my gosh, I think I am onto something. The metrics were roughly 3 times higher than that I expected them to be. That's good news. That's worth doubling down on and really seriously pursuing. But I honestly believe that if I hadn't have captured my expectations up front, I would have gotten to the end of those 3 days at Gen Con and gone, yeah, that probably went about as I expected it would. And I don't think I nearly would have realized the momentum I had or the idea that I was onto. So as you're prototyping, as you are kind of doing experiments or trying out your game, even just as you're going into a first round playtest, right? Capture your assumptions, write them down somewhere. It doesn't have to be a super evolved guess, although certainly you will get better and better at making guesses as you go. But make sure you clearly capture it so that you can then reflect on it with that clarity. The next thing that I put up for people that I learned through my experience, as this random gamer trying his hand at game design at Gen Con, was to be vulnerable. And I'll never forget the first person that I approached or who was going past me, and I said, "Hey, I'm designing a game, or I'm a game designer. Would you be willing to talk to me?" And immediately this voice in my head was like, "No, you're not. Like, you imposter." And we always talk about imposter syndrome, but I absolutely felt it on a huge scale, to the extent that for the rest of that conversation, it was almost hard for me to focus, hard for me to finish my sentences, because this wave of, if I'm honest, like shame or guilt came over me as if I was pulling the wool over this person's eyes by saying I was a game designer. And so, when I say if you're a gamer, you can be a game designer, that is as much to come against that imposter syndrome, that feeling like there should be, or there is some weird higher set of qualifications that you have to meet before you can consider yourself a game designer. I think what I learned through my time at Gen Con, or adjacent to Gen Con, is that that's simply not true. And, as I got through that first conversation, was feeling tough about it, almost with perfect timing. I got an email from an author I follow called Jake Knapp. And he had written up a newsletter article about the idea that I'm paraphrasing it here, but the courage and the ambition that it takes to just get in the ring as a designer, to try your hand at design, is itself the criteria for how much you belong there. And so if you ever find yourself wondering, like, am I qualified to be a game designer? Do I belong here? If you're in the ring doing it, that itself is the qualifier. That is the thing that determines whether or not you should be there. And so the answer is a resounding yes, you absolutely should be there. And I think getting that email at the perfect time when I was feeling especially low on that front was a breath of fresh air, and sent me back into conversations, back into interacting with people and being vulnerable, and opening up and asking what they thought of the idea as I was pitching it and what they thought of it as they were playing it. And a lot of people were positive, but certainly not everyone was positive. But opening myself up to that was such a huge part of getting valuable feedback. And I think to really get valuable feedback on your game or on your idea, you need to be exposing it to people when you know it's not finished, when you know it's still half-baked in several different ways. And in order to get feedback that is actually truly going to improve the idea, it needs to be in a state where it still needs a lot of improvement. And so my encouragement would be to be vulnerable and to share your ideas, share your prototypes, have those discussions when you know you don't have it all figured out. Versus, I think our impulse is to keep everything close to the chest until you feel like it's perfect and then share it with people. Share it when you know it's imperfect. Be vulnerable in that way, and it will make your game design, it will make your ideas that much better. The final thing that I learned through my experience at Gen Con was to iterate. And was to change as you learn, which can only happen if you are clearly articulating your expectations up front, because otherwise you don't know what you're learning. And so if you're doing everything that we talked about to this point, you now are able to iterate and make improvements or pivots off of what you're learning, and go in expecting to do that. If you're sharing things early, if you are capturing your expectations up front, expect that to highlight things that need to change or things that can change to make the game better. And then kind of plan out your approach to game design, expecting to adjust your strategy. I think we all know this as gamers, right? Where if you go into a situation and encounter a level, whatever you want to call it, with an idea of how it's going to play out, and you get smacked down, usually the right answer to getting through is not to go do the exact same thing again. It is to change your tactics, try a different loadout, or execute the plan better or in a different way. And I think that same approach needs to be applied to game design, where go in expecting that you're not going to get your strategy or your design perfect on the first try, and then plan on doing different runs with different approaches as you go. And so for me, that looked like capturing the expectations per day. And then when I was evaluating those expectations, to update them. And so to say, okay, I noticed that lots of people were interested, but not many people wanted to play. Maybe that's because I need to allow for set play times. So I put out a sign-up sheet for play times for people to come back. And I learned very quickly that wasn't as important to deciding that they wanted to buy the game or were interested in the game as I thought. And that was really interesting, like forming my idea of what people needed to experience related to Deck of Wonders before deciding whether or not they wanted it. And so that has changed the way that I approach the game from then on out. saying like maybe at the end on the last day, the most important thing to me was collecting email addresses because I knew I wanted to be talking to these people about the game as it was being developed. And so I captured the expectation of by mentioning emails earlier in the discussion, that will drive email signups. And I clearly saw that that was the case. But I never would have got there if I just, after the first day, kept my same set of assumptions, did the same thing again. I went in expecting to iterate, and that paid dividends for me. That helped make the game and the way I was talking about the game that much better. So yeah, I mean, from the whole nother story at Gen Con, I also met the artist, Lauren Brown, who's now doing all the art for Deck of Wonders. It was an amazing experience overall and set me on a course to leading up to the Kickstarter that really kind of defined the game. So it was an incredible experience. But I wanted to touch on probably the other most formative thing for me, and again, as a gamer and a game designer, and those two being synthesized, for me, it was all about the online community that I found. So if for me, it was Facebook, but I know there's communities on Board Game Geek and other places as well. But finding these groups on Facebook dedicated both to board game design and playing specific types of board games was hugely empowering for me. And engaging in those groups, just as someone who likes board games, who is a gamer, led to a whole bunch of great insight and ideas. And so I would encourage anyone, if you're a gamer, you're probably already in some of those groups. And if you're not, you can go find them and get a ton of interesting conversation and fun and community just from people who like board games, as well as people who are into game design. And what I think I realized very quickly is those two circles overlap. And I would see the same people in the enthusiast group and the game design group hanging out. And that was super encouraging for me, getting connected, having people mentor me or give me advice, and just genuinely enjoy the hobby with me. And I think if you come to game design just as a gamer, as someone passionate about board games, you will find that community and kind of build that community so much easier. And that gives you a leg up because game design is very much not something that you do on your own. It's something you do in community. I think also doing the extra step to find the communities that are specific to the type of game you're interested in. So I'm in several just general board gaming communities. I'm also in solo gaming communities. So Deck of Wonders is a solo board game. And that community those communities have been instrumental in forming pieces of Deck of Wonders. Finding groups of designers, not just the big ones, which are valuable to be in, but also the ones for local game designers to my area. That has been incredibly valuable and led to amazing conversations and insights. And so, that community is incredibly important to being successful as a game designer. And if you are a gamer already, you are probably way more integrated in those communities than you even realize. So yeah, I think that brings everything together. And certainly from my experience, all these aspects where, thinking of myself as a gamer first, and approaching board games and gaming in general from an enthusiast perspective led to all kinds of benefits and legs up on the game design side that I don't think I ever would have noticed or utilized or gotten as much value out of as I did if I was trying to, focus on just the game design side. So if that's you, if you're someone who enjoys board games as a hobby, if you're an enthusiast for board games and you kind of wonder, would I ever be able to do it myself? Take me as proof, and take my resounding yes. If you are a gamer, you can absolutely be a game designer, and you are probably way closer to it than you even realize already. So thank you so much. Again, my name is Dennis Furia. I'm the creator of Deck of Wonders, which should have late pledges open now. You can find the links to that either on Kickstarter, searching for Deck of Wonders, or at deckofwondersgame.com. And thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I hope this was revelatory for you. I hope it was helpful for you. And I hope to see your games soon as well. Thank you so much.